Main zing pages of reports on Chosin. It looks like a piece of junk metal. But in November 1950, this single object, a frozen morphine syringe, became a murder weapon. Declassified medical reports reveal a terrifying anomaly. Hundreds of Marines didn't die from Chinese bullets or shrapnel. They died from something forensic pathologists call post-thaw overdose. At minus 35 degrees, standard medicine becomes toxicology. When a medic injected morphine into a wounded soldier, the cold had already shut down the blood flow. The drug didn't circulate, it just sat there, a frozen depot under the skin. Thinking it wasn't working, the medic would inject a second dose, then a third. Hours later, when the soldier was finally moved to a warm tent, the heat released 3 lethal doses into the heart simultaneously. This wasn't a war against an army, it was a war against physics. Veterans described wounds that didn't bleed. The blood exited the body at 98 degrees and hit the minus 30-degree air. The thermal shock was so violent that the fluid flash froze into red icicles before it even touched the ground. Welcome to Chosin Reservoir, the place where biology goes to die. To understand the survival rate, we must analyze the environment. The ground at Chosin was permafrost. It had the tensile strength of granite. Entrenching tools shattered on impact. You couldn't dig a foxhole. You couldn't bury the dead. So the Marines improvised a gruesome architectural solution. They took the frozen bodies of the enemy and their own fallen brothers and stacked them like sandbags. They built walls of flesh to stop the incoming mortar fire. In this temperature, a corpse was more durable than concrete. Then there was the metal. At 35 below, steel becomes a heat sink with infinite appetite. This phenomenon is known as cold welding. Moisture on the skin freezes instantly upon contact with the tank's hull. If a soldier touched his rifle barrel or a vehicle with bare hands, he didn't just get cold, he suffered a degloving injury. When he pulled his hand away, the epidermis remained fused to the steel, stripping the hand down to the raw dermis. The nerve endings were sheared off before the brain could even register the pain. But the most efficient killer was the body's own cooling system, sweat. It's a lethal thermodynamic trap. To escape the Chinese encirclement, you have to march fast. Exertion creates heat. Heat creates sweat inside your rubber shoepack boots. But the moment you stop to rest, that moisture hits the ambient temperature. It flash freezes inside the sock. You are essentially wrapping your feet in blocks of ice. Pathology reports from 1950 show that necrosis, the death of tissue, set in within 20 minutes. This wasn't just frostbite, it was gangrene eating the foot while the soldier was still walking on it. When the Chinese attacked at night, the Marines faced a mechanical crisis. The lubricating oil in their M1 Garands had thickened into a glue-like sludge. The firing pins were moving too slow to strike the primer. With the enemy swarming, there was only one source of heat available: uric acid and ammonia, leaving the body at 98 degrees. The solution was desperate. Thermodynamics dictates that biological fluid exits the body at nearly 100 degrees. Marines utilized this thermal energy to shock the frozen mechanism. The sudden application of 98-degree fluid melted the frozen oil just long enough to fire a clip. But the cold gave as much as it took. It introduced a phenomenon I call cryogenic cauterization. Normally, a shrapnel wound to the leg leads to hypovolemic shock. You bleed out. But at Chosin, the blood froze so fast that it acted as a natural tourniquet, sealing the arteries. Men with catastrophic limbs were able to walk for miles because the ice held them together. The tragedy only happened later in the medical tents. When they thawed, the wounds opened and the pain, delayed for hours, arrived all at once. And finally, the most bizarre artifact of survival, the Tootsie Roll. Logistics dropped tons of this candy by mistake, thinking Tootsie Roll was still the code name for mortar shells. The Marines were furious until they realized the chemistry of the candy. Frozen Tootsie Rolls provided a massive glucose spike to fight hypothermia-induced lethargy. But more importantly, when chewed, the chocolate became a malleable putty. Mechanics used the chewed candy to patch bullet holes in fuel lines. The moment the wet chocolate hit the freezing air, it hardened into a material as strong as a weld. The retreat from Chosin wasn't just powered by gasoline, it was held together by sugar. As the battle raged, the medical system collapsed, not from a lack of supplies, but from the physics of fluids. Plasma, the life-saving component of blood used to treat shock, is 90% water. In the Chosin winter, the glass bottles froze and shattered. Even if they remained intact, the plasma turned into a toxic slush. Medics faced a horrifying reality. You cannot inject ice-cold fluid into a patient who is already suffering from hypothermia. If you do, the temperature shock sends the heart into immediate cardiac arrest. The cure became the executioner. But the most insidious killer was morphine. This phenomenon is known in forensic toxicology as the depot effect. When a soldier is shot in sub-zero temperatures, his body enters extreme vasoconstriction. The blood vessels in the extremities clamp shut to save the core. The blood stops moving. So when a medic injects morphine, the drug has nowhere to go. It doesn't travel to the brain to relieve pain, it just sits there, pooling in the frozen muscle tissue like a chemical time bomb. The soldier keeps screaming, so the medic, thinking the dose was too weak, injects him again and again. The tragedy happens hours later in the safety of the warming tent. As the soldier's body temperature rises, his blood vessels finally dilate, circulation returns, and suddenly 3 lethal doses of morphine stored in the muscle depot are swept into the bloodstream at the exact same second. It hits the heart like a sledgehammer. Respiratory failure is instant. Hundreds of men survived the Chinese machine guns, only to die from a medical overdose caused by the thaw. Finally, the body reaches its breaking point. To lie down in the snow was to accept death. The ground sucked heat away faster than the air, so the Marines perfected the standing sleep. They would march for 20 minutes, then halt. They would lean against each other or their frozen vehicles, sleeping for exactly 5 minutes while standing upright. It was a zombie-like trance, just enough to reset the brain, but short enough to prevent the blood from pooling and freezing in the legs. Looking back at the forensic evidence, the tragedy of Chosin was exacerbated by gear failure. The 1950 shoe-pack boots were a death sentence. The rubber bottom trapped sweat, while the leather top offered zero insulation against the wind. Compare that to modern Arctic warfare gear, designed with Gore-Tex breathable Gore-Tex and vapor barriers. The men of Chosin didn't just fight the enemy, they fought their own equipment. The survivors call themselves the Chosin Few. Even today, decades later, many suffer from severe neuropathy. Their nerves were permanently damaged by the cold. They still feel the phantom burning of the Korean winter in their fingertips. They walked out of hell on frozen feet, proving that the human will is the only machine that doesn't freeze at -35. Now, I leave you with a question of medical ethics. If you were a medic in 1950 and your brother was screaming in agony with a shattered leg, would you inject the morphine to give him peace, knowing it might kill him later, or would you let him scream to ensure he survives the night? There is no right answer. Let me know your choice in the comments below. And for the brutal reality of how trench foot rotted soldiers alive in World War I, click right here.